to the session on automotive technologies, the disruptive part. My name is Alex Taylor. There are a lot of disruptive technologies happening in cars these days, and there's been more change in the past 10 years than there has been in the previous century and a half, practically. But nothing is more important than the changes coming on in powertrain. And on that topic, we have two experts in the area. JB Straubel from Tesla, which will sell 50,000 cars this year, making it no longer a minor car player, but a major one. We'll be talking about Tesla's use of battery EVs. And Gilbert Straubel of Hyundai, which may surprise many of you to learn was the first company to build a production fuel cell car. We're talking about fuel cells and hydrogen EVs as the path to the future. So our format will be the following. JB and Gil will each make a presentation of about 10 minutes. I'll ask them a few questions about that afterwards, and we'll open it up for questions from the audience after that, and hopefully get through all this in 50 minutes. So JB, why don't you start?
Sure. Should I get up here? Or?
Yeah, wherever you like.
So I'll try and be brief here. I just wanted to give a quick overview on why at Tesla we chose EVs and why we're focused on battery EVs for our products and for all the development that we're doing. Let's see. So to start out, I think that the biggest reason is that EVs and a battery EV gives you the best and most cost-efficient way to use 100% sustainable energy in a car. So if you sort of look to the future and say that we have to find a way to do that, to run a vehicle and run the transportation fleet on either solar or wind power, or maybe nuclear, depending on sort of what you view as sustainable, this is the most efficient way to do that. You can charge the car directly, from those energy sources, and you can very efficiently take the energy back out of the battery and run the motor and power the car. There's no intermediate energy conversions, and this is a pretty important step. So as far as we can find, this is the most efficient way to link up renewable energy directly to transportation. It's also scalable. And when we started the company, we wanted to find a technology pathway and a powertrain technology that could scale to millions of cars. Not just tens of thousands where we are today, but scale up to millions and eventually even billions of cars. The world vehicle fleet today is something around 2 billion cars. And we build about 100 million new cars around the world every single year. So the scope of this market is massive. And we can't look to a technology that can only scale to small numbers. It won't remain relevant. And one example of kind of how we can scale this is thinking about what we're doing today with batteries. Tesla is today building the world's biggest battery factory in Nevada. And this factory alone is enough to power about 500,000 cars per year, new vehicles built per year. But this is, of course, just one factory. Many other car makers are going to need to do things similar to this. Other battery companies are going to do things similar to this. But in looking at that scalability problem, we also want to look at the commodities and the materials that go into the batteries. And a lot of people have made reports or been concerned about lithium shortages, but there really is no lithium shortage. There's plenty of lithium in the Earth's crust. It's a quite prevalent material. There's also plenty of nickel, for all the batteries of this type of chemistry. There's plenty of, cobalt, which isn't used in very high concentrations. So looking at all the commodities and all the materials that go into today's lithium-ion batteries, you could scale this up, to many millions and millions of units without any fundamental limitations. That's a pretty important choice in our view on why you would pick a certain technology. Third is infrastructure. And, I think there's maybe been too much fear with electric vehicles about a charging problem or an infrastructure problem, when in reality, the electric infrastructure is probably the best infrastructure in the world. There's electricity in every single building. It's probably within 10 feet of you anytime you're inside of a building, which is pretty amazing. And most electric vehicles will charge at their home. That's where we see 80 to 90% of people charging. It's very convenient. You wake up in the morning and your car is fully charged. You can go on about your day for hundreds of miles. The one infrastructure problem that we did tackle was long-distance driving. And we did this with a network that we call the Supercharge network. So we've started building these fast charging stations around the country. We started in California and have expanded out. And this is what it looks like today. Sorry about that. This is what it looks like today in the US. Now you can drive coast to coast without using anything except these superchargers. This will give you a charge in about 20 to 30 minutes, and then you can drive another 150 to 200 miles. So it's a very, very quick experience. And if you're driving for 2 or 3 hours, stopping for 20 minutes and then driving another 2 or 3 hours, it's kind of the typical pattern if you're going on a long road trip. So we see people using this just like they would use a gasoline car. It's really no different on a long distance trip. And we're continuing to build this out. We're installing a station about once every 24 hours. The cost of these stations is also very reasonable. We can build a new station for a few $100,000. And we're actually beginning to see landlords and people pulling these stations because of the traffic that they generate. It generates a lot of retail sales. This is what it looks like in Europe, and now also in Asia. We're building these in China and Japan. So we actually have more stations in Europe now than we do in North America with higher density. The fourth attribute for EVs that I think is very critical is that you can build a car that's desirable, that people really want to drive. We can make something that has torque, that has acceleration and handling, that can compete directly with a gasoline car. And I think the Roadster, the first car we built several years ago, it was a very small sports car, but it could compete directly with other sports cars. And now the Model S that we're building today is successfully competing with other luxury sedans. We're actually outselling the Mercedes S-Class in North America, which is a pretty amazing feat when that car has been refined and perfected for many, many decades. And that's something that the battery electric vehicles can do. That it doesn't need a technology revolution. It doesn't need some giant invention. We're at a place today where we can compete. And finally, we see a roadmap for where technology is going for batteries that is improving fairly quickly. Many people think batteries are sort of stagnant or they're not improving or we need to wait for some big breakthrough, but they're actually improving pretty fast. And what we see is basically a curve that's doubling about every 10 years. That's probably the simplest rule of thumb to remember. And this is doubling in terms of how much range or energy you can get in a given weight or volume. And 10 years in the automotive industry is not that long. That's not many cycles of brand new platforms of cars. It's maybe somewhere in the 3, maybe even 4 if you're going really fast cycles of vehicles. So this is when GM launched their EV1, which was probably one of the best ground up EVs that had been built before. This is when we launched the Roadster. And it was a little less than 10 years in between those two, and the chemistry had improved such that we could suddenly leap to over 200 miles of range when GM was struggling to get even 100 miles of range. And that was a pretty fundamental shift. It changed EVs from a niche product that really couldn't get acceptance to something where they could start to compete with gasoline head-to-head. This is when we launched the Model S. It had improved again another about 30%, and this is where it's expected to be as we launch Model 3. But this curve isn't slowing down either. We expect this is going to keep going. The material science and battery chemistry isn't reaching a plateau, and we think that there's another at least doubling possible within generally the same type of understanding of batteries we have today. So this is part of why we're so bullish on pure EVs. Many other technologies rely on generators on board or other ways to kind of get around relying too much on the battery. And we just look to the future and think that as the battery improves, this will be the simple and very streamlined architecture of choice. So we put all of our focus into making that as good as it can be and being ready as the technology matures. With that, I will wrap up and be quiet for some questions, perhaps.
What does your cost curve look like? Up till now, most of the Teslas are sold for premium prices. Is that going to come down to affordable levels at some point?
Well, most of our focus is on cost reduction. So we have a Model 3 vehicle that's in development right now. We call it the Model 3. That car, we're targeting about a $35,000 price point with over 200 miles of usable range. And we expect to have that ready in 2017. So that's another big reduction in cost. But even going from the Roadster to Model S, we almost cut the starting price of the car in half. So with each successive generation, we're coming close to cutting the price in half, which is, it'd be great if we could keep that up for another 3 or 4 generations. But getting to $35,000 and 200 miles is a major turning point.
Certainly is. Gil, give it a shot.
So good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. What I'm going to say actually pretty much resonates very closely with what JB talked about, but we're going to diverge in some significant ways in terms of where we see the future going. So let me get started here. So first of all, I think it's something that Tesla and Hyundai would agree on is the fact that we need to go in an electrified direction, regardless of what that electrified platform might be. Really, through electrification, that's the only way that we can hope to achieve any reduction, meaningful reduction in greenhouse gases, continue to improve our fleet fuel economy, and also reduce our reliance on overseas energy. But one thing that really have to keep in mind is that it doesn't really matter how great the technology may be if the consumer really isn't buying it. And really, the technology or the consumer nowadays is just as diverse as they've ever been, especially when you look at them from a global perspective. People are buying vehicles of different sizes, they have different vehicle needs, they have different environments in which they're driving them, they have to drive different distances, and of course, the buying power of a consumer ranges widely. And so, ultimately, we have to make sure that we can build a technology or a range of technologies to suit the right range of consumer needs. And so it's our perspective that one single solution isn't necessarily the best solution for everyone. There's actually two primary pure electrification pathways. One, of course, is the battery EV, in which you're storing electricity on board through the batteries. But the other electrification pathway is the hydrogen EV. And that's where you're actually generating electricity on board using hydrogen as the fuel. The fuel cell is the device that basically converts that hydrogen into electricity. Both of these electric vehicles are actually quite important, but they're also quite complementary in that they actually serve different parts of the consumer market. And so both will be equally important as we move forward with the transportation industry. So at Hyundai, the hydrogen EV really is at the center of our strategy. However, it's not the only technology that we're working on. In fact, we're working on a battery electric that we'll introduce next year, and that's the first of several to come. From a global perspective, the Hyundai Motor Group is actually working on introducing by 2020 about 12 hybrid vehicles, 6 plug-in vehicles, 2 battery electric, and 2 hydrogen EVs. And we actually need all those different types of technologies because we have a very diverse global customer base. So why do we believe so strong in hydrogen EV? It's really for the very basic reason that the hydrogen EV is really one of the few technologies that doesn't require the consumer to change their driving behavior or their ownership experience. Consumers nowadays have very clear expectations in terms of what they feel a passenger car or truck should be capable of doing. In other words, hydrogen EV is really one of the few technologies that is capable of meeting the consumer's expectations today. It does this by combining the best of both worlds. It combines the advantages of a gasoline internal combustion engine in terms of long range, quick refueling, limited weather impact, and scalability. In other words, we can make them in small or large vehicles. It combines that with the benefits of a battery electric, which are, of course, zero emissions, improved fuel efficiency, the instant torque, and the fact that we can use domestic and renewable energy sources. So for those of you who may not be familiar with a fuel cell vehicle or fuel cell technology, just very briefly, let me explain. A fuel cell basically generates electricity through an electrochemical process that actually involves no combustion. There is no burning of the hydrogen. Instead, it's converted to electricity, and it's done so by teasing apart the protons and electrons in a hydrogen molecule through a catalyst. The electrons complete the circuit. That's what drives the vehicle. The electrons and protons are then recombined with oxygen that we get from the air to produce water. And water is, in fact, the only emissions that you'll find in a hydrogen vehicle. In terms of what's on the vehicle itself, it actually looks very similar to a hybrid vehicle in that we have a small battery that's used for regenerative braking to recapture some of that lost energy. And that battery is also used to help during acceleration. So it operates in much the same way as a hybrid vehicle. So where exactly is a lot of the hydrogen coming from? I think that's one of the big questions people have. Hydrogen actually is really the most abundant element in the universe, but it doesn't really exist in its natural state here on Earth. We have to actually produce it. Up to now, most of the hydrogen produced comes from natural gas, but there are actually renewable pathways for hydrogen. Hydrogen can be produced from a number of different sources, including biogas, direct photovoltaic, solar, geothermal, etc. In California, actually, 33% of all the hydrogen being produced for vehicles is coming from renewable sources. And that number is actually expected to continue to increase. The second big question, of course, related to this is greenhouse gases. Since a lot of the hydrogen is currently produced from natural gas, the question is, well, are we really making an improvement in reducing our greenhouse gas emissions? And what you'll see here on the chart to the right is that when you look at battery electric and hydrogen electric, regardless of the energy source, there's still a significant improvement over a conventional gasoline engine. Whether you're looking at the national grid, where a lot of the electricity produced actually comes from coal plants, or you're looking at the California grid, where it's much cleaner, uses a lot more natural gas, you'll see that the improvements steadily get better. And then finally, of course, when you look at renewables, then both hydrogen, EV, and battery electric show significant advantages over gasoline. So we think that battery electric vehicles are actually a very good solution for some consumers, but not necessarily for everyone. And maybe this is one of the areas where we diverge a little bit from Tesla. We see, as does most of the industry, that battery electrics really, given the technology, the fact that low energy density of a battery and its high weight, it's really better suited for smaller vehicles, shorter range, at least in terms of cost, system costs. Once you get to larger vehicles, CUVs, SUVs, pickup trucks, things of that nature, then the size, the weight, and the range of those vehicles really necessitates something more of a fuel cell, which has much more of a flatter price curve than does a battery. Now, of course, this isn't a static curve. The curve will change over time. Tesla will continue improving their battery technology, as will everyone else. But then, at the same time, fuel cell technology will keep improving. So will always be this transition point where one technology, I think, will be advantageous in a certain area, and another technology advantageous in another area. And why this is important is because, as you know, we don't just buy small compact cars. We buy a big range of cars. If all the passenger cars in the US were to be battery electrics, which they really can't, that still would only represent less than 30% of the overall transportation greenhouse gases emitted in the US. So really, current battery EVs are a great solution for part of the market. But not everyone wants a small car. Not everyone lives in sunny California. Like I said, right now, the small compact cars really only represent 21% of the market. The other remaining are bigger vehicles. At the same time, we understand, and we've seen and observed that batteries do have issues when it comes to temperature, especially, say, up here in the Northeast, where you can get some pretty cold winters. Range can get significantly affected by that, and as so does the range at high temperatures, such as if you're living in Arizona. Even if you do want a small car, you may not be able to buy an electric car. It's interesting to note that of everyone out there, 80% of people who own their homes have a place to charge, but 20% actually don't. And that number is only 40% if you start renting. If the goal is actually to get all the gasoline vehicles off the road, we also have to look at second life. These vehicles have to be adopted as used cars. And once you start looking at the used car market, then home ownership, of course, drops significantly because we're talking about lower income families and such. And so the issue of charging at home becomes greater. The second thing that's really interesting is that, again, if we really want to use the electric vehicle or battery electric vehicle to take gasoline vehicles off the road, then we want them to come into a household and replace a gasoline car. But what's happening now is that 1/3 of the battery electrics being purchased are actually in addition to the household fleet. They're not selling their big SUV, they're not selling their small sports car, they're adding to the household fleet. So we're not really changing much of the transportation landscape with the batteries. And then finally, it all comes down to consumer purchase decisions. Right now in California, you can actually purchase a Nissan Leaf for about $11,000. That's extremely affordable. That's a lot cheaper than the Sentra. Yet when you look at overall sales, the Nissan Leaf sells about 1/10 what the Sentra does. And these are comparably quick vehicles. In California, where you have all these incentives, the Leaf really represents only 17% of Sentra sales. Here in New York, it's only 1%. So there's obviously, the Leaf itself, it's a great vehicle, I like it, but it's not for everyone, for all the reasons that we've been stating. And so what has Hyundai done in terms of fuel cell technology? Well, what's interesting is that fuel cells are relatively new to the industry. They've been around for quite some time. Actually, they were used during the Apollo missions. But in terms of automotive application, really, we've only begun to see them over the last couple of years. From R&D to actual production, it's taken Hyundai less than 10 years to reach the point we're at right now. And in that short period of time, what we've seen is that fuel cell technology is really now on par with gasoline technology in terms of durability and driving range. Really, the main hurdle that remains is cost. And for that, there's a very clear pathway through increased manufacturing and reducing precious metal loading and such. Hyundai celebrated the start of the Tucson fuel cell last year. Actually, we started selling in the US last year. It was first produced in 2013, and it's available in Europe and also in South Korea. And for those of you who are curious, if you live in Southern California, you can actually lease one for about $500 a month. It includes all the maintenance, but also includes all the fuel you can use. So for some consumers, it's actually quite a deal. And it makes a lot of sense. But of course, you have to live near a refueling station. And that really is the big issue, which I'll talk about very briefly. As good as the technology is, really you can't get around the fact that if you don't have a place to fuel it, it's irrelevant. And unfortunately, fueling infrastructure is not where it needs to be, but it is growing. In California right now, there's about 9 hydrogen stations, mostly in Southern California. That number is going to increase to about 20 stations before year end, which will include Southern California and Northern California Bay Area. The goal for California is to basically develop and put in place about 100 stations in the 2020 timeframe. This will provide Californians kind of the comfort as well as that confidence to be able to drive their fuel cell vehicles anywhere throughout the state. But we understand that this is just a drop in the bucket, and this can't remain a California-only solution. This really has to be a national solution. And to that end, actually, the Department of Energy, along with a lot of manufacturers, state agencies, fuel providers, have been working hand in hand to develop a national strategy. So the good news is that the next location for hydrogen infrastructure is actually in the Northeast. Towards the end of next year, I think we're going to start seeing the first number of public hydrogen stations throughout Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New York. But make no, we have to be very clear on the fact that really adoption for hydrogen EVs is not going to happen overnight. It's really much more of a marathon rather than a sprint. However, the benefits are significant if we do in fact achieve this goal. So looking over the future, we really do think that hydrogen EVs are poised for growth in the United States. Like I said, fuel cell durability performance is already meeting customer expectations. Pathways exist for reducing costs in terms of manufacturing scale, etc. Low carbon sources for hydrogen are being developed. And countries such as Japan, Scandinavian countries, Germany are taking a leadership position. Japan, so much as declared they want to create a hydrogen society, basically where hydrogen will fuel both transportation as well as residential applications. And maybe the strongest case for hydrogen EVs is the fact that every major manufacturer is going to be selling a fuel cell vehicle around the 2020 timeframe. Everyone's kind of pretty much reached the same conclusion that there's a place for battery EVs, but there's also a place for hydrogen EVs, and they can both kind of play in the same sandlot, if you will. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Gil. First question I have is, what is it like to refuel a hydrogen vehicle? What's it like to have that big tank driving around behind your second seat?
Refueling a hydrogen vehicle is actually completely the same as fueling a gasoline car. The stations are designed to be almost identical. The process takes about 5 minutes or so to refuel a hydrogen vehicle. The nozzle, the way you enter everything on the dispenser is exactly the same. The only difference, of course, is right now the gas is stored at pressure. And so there's actually a communication link between the dispenser and the vehicle. This communication link is so that the tank communicates to the dispenser and tells it how much pressure is in the tank, what's the temperature of the fuel, et cetera. And then the dispenser will fuel at a rate according to that information.
So a question for both of you. 125 years ago, we had steam-powered cars, we had battery-powered cars, and then we had internal combustion cars. The internal combustion engine won, and it's been the prevalent technology for a century, basically. Will be another century before another technology replaces that? And what's happened in the past 10 years to create this change in potential for automotive propulsion?
Well, I think it'll take much less than 100 years. I mean, we're already seeing, I think much more vibrant competition amongst all these different technologies with internal combustion. I mean, a lot of things have changed. The availability of batteries and other components that, electric motors, power electronics that let you build a propulsion system that, can be very compact and very high performance. That didn't exist really even 20 or 30 years ago. And also, I think increased environmental awareness is really, driving a lot of these changes as well, both CO2, but also just local air quality and local emissions.
I totally agree with that. So, I mean, before, there was no real external factors kind of promoting the development of alternative technology, but now, really, it's the external factors, the greenhouse gases, the concern for the environment, local communities and such that's driving a lot of this innovation.
Now, the government's setting a target for fuel economy for 2025 of what, 54.5 miles per gallon? Are EVs essential for us in order to reach that target? And if so, what kind of penetration do you expect by that time?
Well, I mean, today we're getting, something around 80 to 90 miles per gallon on the Model S, and the Model X, is similar to this. So, I mean, in our view, that's kind of a sluggish pace of fuel economy and standards. I think pretty much any EV on the market from any of the manufacturers is far in excess of where those standards are. In terms of penetration, I think it really depends on how fast other manufacturers, go in a direction to really embrace that. And to date, it's been more of a sort of battle. I think, we try and increase fuel economy standards, and everyone pushes back as hard as they can and kind of drags their feet. So I think penetration could be much higher if we really embraced it.
Yeah, from a kind of a full lineup manufacturer, I think actually a lot of improvements have been made to internal combustion engines, and I think the lion's share of meeting those fuel standards will be done primarily through internal combustion and increased hybrids and plug-in hybrids. Battery EV penetration, I think, will still be relatively small and be a small contributor to the overall meeting of those standards. But it really just depends on how quickly battery electric technology can improve to meet a greater portion of the population, and then as well as how quickly can infrastructure for hydrogen vehicles be implemented so that those vehicles can be available for other consumers.
Years ago, the conventional wisdom was that fuel cells were the fuel of the future. Fuel of the future, and it always would be.
Right.
What's changed in the past couple of years to make that not true, so true anymore?
Certainly two things. One is from a technology standpoint, the fuel cell technology has advanced significantly. It wasn't that long ago that if you had a fuel cell stack and the tanks and everything, it basically would occupy the whole passenger space and cargo area of a vehicle. Nowadays, like for the Tucson, it doesn't occupy any more space than a conventional internal combustion engine and a gasoline tank, as well as the range. Right now, early on, the platinum loading, for example, of a fuel cell was something like 60 grams. A traditional passenger car with a catalyst has about 6 grams of precious metal. Precious metal, like platinum, is very expensive. Today's modern fuel cell uses more of the order of 11 grams of platinum. In fact, for example, Toyota is saying that their next generation is going to be even less than what a diesel vehicle uses in terms of platinum. So that's from the technology side. From a public infrastructure side, before there was always a big talk about let's develop this, but there was always this chicken and egg issue coming up with who's going to develop what and when. California's pretty much stepped up and said we're going to help fund the first 100 stations. And then manufacturers such as Hyundai come in and said, well, we're going to sell this chicken and egg. Here's the chicken, if you will. Now let's continue building the stations. And that really didn't exist before.
Elon Musk has famously referred to fuel cells as fool cells. Does that mean that Tesla is staying away from fuel cells forever?
Generally, yes. I don't think, I mean, the future that we see doesn't really have fuel cells being a competitive product mix. And I think despite a lot of manufacturers, having strong statements about fuel cells, I think if you look at the actual numbers of vehicles being produced and the availability of those vehicles, it's pretty limited. I'm not sure exactly how many Tucson vehicles, fuel cell Tucson vehicles Hyundai is building, but to date we've seen fleets that are in the single-digit hundreds to single-digit thousands, which from manufacturers is tiny. So, and focused mainly in California, where it's really focused on meeting regulatory requirements from the ZEV mandate from CARB. So I think if it was a broad, sort of worldwide push, maybe we'd feel a little bit different, but we just don't see the technology competing.
Now, the most popular vehicle in America is not a passenger car like the Sentra or the Prius. It's a pickup truck. Are these technologies are both applicable to pickup trucks?
Yeah, I believe so. When you look at the scalability of a fuel cell, it's pretty much like you have an internal combustion engine. The bigger the vehicle, the bigger the displacement of the internal combustion engine, right? You got a 5-liter, 6-liter, 7-liter. With a fuel cell, all you're doing is adding cells to the stack, and so you're making incrementally bigger to increase the output. So a fuel cell could easily be put into a pickup truck. In fact, in Korea, we have city buses that are fuel cell buses. And what they do is they take 2 stacks off of Tucson, and that moves the city bus. Other manufacturers are looking at it in terms of heavy-duty tractor trailers, for fuel cell. In this case, it'd be more of a plug-in solution where you have batteries and fuel cell, depending on the usage mode. So the scalability is definitely one of the key advantages to fuel cell.
2 more questions, and we'll turn it over to questions from the audience. We're living in a strange new environment now when oil sells for $42 per barrel, and gasoline prices will probably be coming down again this fall. What does this do to the market for alternative fuel vehicles?
Well, I think oil will remain pretty volatile in my view. When Tesla was started, oil was less than $30 a barrel. So we really take a more long view on what the price of petroleum is going to do over several years to decades. And I think almost no one really believes it's going to remain low or continue to decrease for very long time frames. In addition, it's not 100% about just the price of oil. We're really looking at other attributes and related to efficiency or sustainability. So we haven't seen it change sales very much, actually. We've had our record sales quarters in some of the months when petroleum was cheapest.
It's remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very different though when you look at the mainstream consumer. Someone who's shopping for a $90,000 car, it's a little bit different in terms of what's the purchase motivation. If you're shopping for a $20,000 car, the purchase motivation is much more rational. It really is about value for money. And when you talk to the average consumer, it's really about, am I getting enough bang for the buck? And right now, the state of a lot of alternative technology is saying no, just because fuel prices are so low. And that's really what makes it very difficult. Again, it doesn't matter how great the technology may be. Tesla produces great vehicles. We're coming up with great technology, but as long as fuel prices remain low, it becomes a big challenge. The other thing that's kind of important is that we talk about the fuel standards. Internal combustion engines keep improving over time. They've gotten much more efficient. And so the delta between what you get with a regular internal combustion engine and a hybrid becomes smaller. So much so that a person will say, look, I can already get 40 miles to the gallon with this car without having to go electrified. Why should I? And so those are some of the challenges I think that we're all facing.
And looking even further out in the future, do we think of this as a zero-sum game, or do we see there'll be a multiplicity of powertrain solutions?
Oh, I think it'll be a huge diversity of different technologies, just like we see diesel and gasoline coexisting today, with CNG in some places. I think we'll just add a bunch of other technologies into that mix.
Yeah, absolutely. I think eventually the internal combustion engine will be phased out, and you'll see much more electrified solutions, whether it's battery or a fuel cell. And then, of course, the different ways in which that electricity or hydrogen is created will be just as varied.
Great. Questions from the floor? Start over here on the right.
Hi, you said that you and Musk are not looking at the hydrogen solution. So how is he planning to address the problems that you brought up about? Are you just going to ignore that market, or do you feel you're going to design your way into that market?
Well, do you mean in terms of large vehicles in particular?
In terms of large vehicles, or the weather issues, or all the issues,
Sure.
the price issue that you mentioned. Do you believe that that'll just be a technology solution?
Well, I guess I don't really think that those are as big of issues as maybe Hyundai sees them to be. The Model S is a reasonably large vehicle. We can carry 7 people with 2 kids.
It's okay for my multi-millionaire boss to buy it, but I'm not going to buy it.
Because of cost?
Yeah.
So Model 3 is where we're really focused for reducing price. I think if we really compared head-to-head cost of fuel cell versus electric, the cost of fuel cells today are not exactly as cheap as it might seem. And we really haven't talked about the cost of energy with hydrogen. That's one that I think is often overlooked a little bit. But hydrogen today is quite expensive. So EVs today have a lower cost of operation per mile than gasoline or hydrogen by quite a wide margin. And as we bring the cost of the car down, it'll be the cheapest car to actually operate and commute. So I think we're going to see adoption more driven by the cost of operation over time.
Will you get down to a $20,000?
Eventually, I'm sure we will. But right now we're building as many cars. I mean, we're selling cars quickly and building as many as we can. So it's one sort of model at a time. But $35,000 is a pretty big leap to take from where we are with Model S.
Sir.
Would you like to tell us about the cost of a battery, the cost of replacement, and the issues around disposal of the batteries that are used in an electric vehicle?
Well, I can't give you the details on the cost of the batteries. It's sort of a secret that we kind of try and hold internally, and a lot of our competitors love to know about that stuff too. But
could we establish that they're reasonably expensive?
It depends on your definition of expensive. It's a tough one to answer. I'm sorry. I think in most people think that they're a higher percentage of the Model S than they are. Maybe I'll answer it that way. Well, I think that's a function also of having it go through service and things like this. The actual cost of the cells in the Model S is a pretty small percentage of the car. Model S is expensive because it's a luxury, performance sedan. Why is an S-Class Mercedes so expensive? We have basically the same content of a similarly priced gasoline car, yet we also have the battery and the electric propulsion system. And in terms of recycling, that's actually, and sort of disposal, it's actually a really interesting, cool thing. At the end of life on a battery pack, all the same materials you put in there are still there. Nothing was burned, nothing went out to the atmosphere. You didn't use up anything. Everything is still inside. All the lithium, all the other pieces you put in there. And you can recycle it and reprocess it to recover 100% of the sort of elements you put in when you built it new. So we're starting to build a portion of the battery factory, the Gigafactory in Nevada, to do a recycling remanufacturing process. So we'll take back in old battery packs and just refurbish them. It's a detailed refurbishment. You have to take it all apart, but you can essentially build new batteries out of old batteries.
And what about service life?
Of the car itself?
Of the battery.
Oh, generally life of car. We see cars going. We have an unlimited mile warranty actually on the battery in the 85 kilowatt hour Model S, and we see cars that have gone well over 100,000 miles, some 200,000 miles. So having a big battery lets you have a very, very long lifetime, and you don't put that many deep discharge cycles in the pack. That's one of the benefits.
Deborah.
Yes. JB, first of all, congratulations on what you've done at Tesla. It's been amazing. Now, we've heard a lot of talk about vulnerabilities in the electrical grid. And just as a consumer, I wouldn't get an electric car because in my neighborhood, when it rains, some trees fall down and we get out of power. So fortunately, I have gas on my stove. I can heat water. I know how to light it without a pilot light. And I can get coffee. I can use my car that has gasoline, and I can go out and I have a place where I can recharge my iPhone. But I would be very wary of putting everything on an electrical grid, which is going to be increasingly vulnerable, particularly with all this talk of smart grids. So as a consumer, that concerns me. How would you address that issue?
Well, part of another business that we're working on is actually adding storage into the electric grid. And I think that you're going to see batteries in solar distributed generation making the grid much more resilient and much more distributed. Today, to be sure, if the grid goes down, you can't charge your car at home. But the grid in the U.S. is generally pretty reliable in most cases. And what we're enabling people to do with home batteries is actually give them backup power at their house. So even if your local grid goes out, the battery in your house could keep running. And if you had solar or something like this on your roof, you could still run your house. You can still charge your car. So that's what we call the Power Wall. It's a product we announced earlier this year. But I think overall that I don't believe is going to be a big limitation to adoption. If the power goes out, in most cases, you can't pump gasoline either. That's kind of forgotten about in a lot of places. Full charge can take you a few hundred miles as well, and usually you don't have a regional grid that goes out. So if you needed to drive to maybe another supercharger or something like that, I don't think we've had a single instance yet of someone that had so much of a grid go out that they couldn't get to another supercharger, to fill up a car if they had to. So.
Robert?
So I'd like to also ask a Tesla question, forgive me, but sort of as a business geek, there are lots of terrific technologies where the successful implementation of the technology and integration with a business model sort of litters the landscape with failures. So as you look back over the last several years of Tesla, what's the secret sauce that allowed for the combination of a business model challenging a distribution system, which you did, having sort of PR events where you had the fires that you had to overcome in certain batteries, and yet you've had this phenomenal success in terms of number of units, adaptation, and the future. And there has to be something unique about either the way you approach the business or the way you integrated the business model and the technology.
The secret sauce is JB.
Okay, and that's the answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Harold. I don't know about, but I mean, I don't think it's a single piece. You know, I think if we had to put our finger on one thing, it's that the product is really good. You know, people love the product, and you know, the car is very good. You know, it's won tons of awards. You know, the customers refer it. It sells itself. And I think a lot of companies that struggle with this kind of got the product wrong. You know, they either got the range wrong, the performance wrong, you know, the market segmentation wrong, and they had a vehicle that customers didn't really love and they didn't really want. So you know, that sort of makes everything an uphill battle. And you know, by getting a product that people love, and it's the car that, you know, it's their favorite car to drive, you know, all these other problems sort of, you know, roll downhill, or it makes everything, you know, grow and go more smoothly. So I think sort of maniacal focus on making an amazing product that customers love. That's probably the key.
Joe, I'll give you a shot here. Could you talk about the range difference between EVs and fuel cell vehicles now and then perhaps 2 or 3 years in the future?
Sure. So right now, when we look at vehicles, we're looking, of course, at the mainstream product, right? Majority of consumers who are spending something around $25,000 per car, let's say. So when you're looking at that area, you're looking at the Leafs, you're looking at the Sparks, the Fits of the world, and these vehicles are achieving about a 100-mile range, which we've seen and we've observed is not significant enough for most consumers. Not necessarily because they're driving more than 100 miles a day, but because when a consumer buys a vehicle, they're not buying for their daily needs. They're buying a vehicle based on the what-ifs. What if I have to drive X far? What if this happens? What if something else goes wrong? That's why people buy 3-row SUVs, not necessarily because they have kids in every row, but because every once in a while they might use that 3rd row. A fuel cell vehicle such as ours right now achieves 265 miles in terms of range. And this is with our current generation. Our next generation, which is a couple years away, is going to have significantly over 300-mile range. The next generation of battery electrics that are coming on board, for example, GM has the new Bolt, the next generation Leaf. They're going to achieve 200 miles, I think similar to what Tesla will achieve. But these are vehicles that are still going to be sold for $35,000 for a compact or subcompact car that may seat 4 people, maybe 5 in a pinch. And you're comparing them to vehicles that are still being sold traditionally for, again, $20,000. Next generation fuel cells, like I'm saying, will have ranges of greater than 300 miles. So battery electrics are getting better, right? But fuel cell vehicles, I think, still it's worlds apart in terms of range capability.
So I have a question for Gil. I mean, I'm an electric car owner, a Leaf, and there were a lot of safety concerns about electric cars that I think were overblown, and certainly I now feel like it's as safer than an internal combustion engine car. But hydrogen tanks, you know, convince me that it's going to be the same circumstance, that 5 years from now we'll go, no big deal, same or you know, as good as the other options.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. Hydrogen vehicles, there's certainly a big education component. People think, when you think of hydrogen, you know, the word is Hindenburg, right? That's what always comes up. And it's just a lot of miseducation. For one thing, all our fuel cell vehicles, Tucson included, meet all the same safety standards as any conventional car. We basically will rear end our car at, I think it's something like 40 or 60 miles an hour, and verify system integrity. Not only that the system is intact, but there's actually no leakage. and this is part of just regular regulations. If there is leakage, actually, there's 4 sensors on board to detect and shut off the system at its source. That's standard operating procedure for any fuel cell vehicle. Hydrogen itself is much lighter than air, and it dissipates extremely quickly. So if you're in an open space, basically it's gone into the atmosphere immediately. In terms of refueling, what's interesting is if I came up to you today and said, I have this great idea. I've got this propellant, it's called gasoline. You store it underground where it could leach into the water. It puddles on the floor and where it can combust, and it's toxic to inhale. All right? People don't really seem to worry about that anymore because you've gotten used to it, right? The fueling procedure for a hydrogen car is no different than a gasoline car. And if anything, it's safer because for the reasons I just stated. It's not toxic, it dissipates into the atmosphere very quickly, and because of all the safety systems built into the vehicle, I would say it's just as safe as a Leaf.
In the back there.
In what areas does it make sense for Tesla to help promote the development of the EV ecosystem in terms of standardization, maybe in terms of charging stations and in other areas? And then the second would be, in 2025, do you think there'll be Tesla cars without drivers?
Well, in terms of standardization or ecosystem, we're doing what we can to promote that even today, in generally all the regions that we operate in. I think the challenge with some of the standardization is that a lot of the standards are set using not very forward-looking technology roadmaps. And it's a frustration to me, but a lot of these are sort of done by big committees of companies. And for instance, the DC charging standard that just got ratified in North America can't even handle the current power levels that we supercharge at. I mean, that seems really frustrating. So it actually has negative lead time. We can't improve the technology. We would have to slow it down to use the standard. However, we obviously believe deeply in EVs. That's core to our mission. So we want to do everything we can to get some level of standardization, make it convenient for drivers, make charging locations even more prevalent at all power levels. So we try and promote that as much as we can. In terms of driverless cars, I think we're working on this very aggressively right now. We have actually a pretty big release of sort of a new set of features via software very, very soon, actually in just a few weeks, to a lot of our customers. However, it's going to take a long time before the driver is just not in the car. I think this will end up being a long tail where the car can eventually do 80, 90% of the driving, maybe even 95% of the driving. But the final step to just sort of sitting in the back seat or taking a nap is a pretty difficult one to make. And I think it'll feel a lot like cruise control. Today cruise control is pretty smart, and it's just going to get smarter and smarter and smarter. To the point where we can have a car that just drives on the freeway and sort of respects lane boundaries and doesn't hit anything else. Eventually that expands into the city. Maybe it expands into giving a navigation search algorithm and then having it follow the route. So it's pretty straightforward to see how that can keep expanding. The other big thing that we see is safety. This will enhance safety in the cars in such a major way. Most accidents are attributable to the driver. Someone being distracted, someone missing something that they should have seen or maybe could have seen. Not a car wheel falling off. That's pretty rare that the car mechanically fails and causes an accident. So if we can address and sort of back up the driver and give them more awareness, cover more situations, that's going to be great. And it's going to save a lot of lives.
If I can add to that, I think I totally agree with that. The really interesting part is the in-between, where right now you have some technology that enables you to kind of take your hands off the wheel. You don't have to worry so much about your blind spots. The future where you don't have a car, that's great. You might not even have a steering wheel. But it's that interim period that's going to be really interesting, where sometimes the systems may work, sometimes they may not work. And at what point do you have enough confidence to really say, yeah, okay, I'm going to back off and let the car take over? Things may work great on the freeway, but getting home that last mile is actually going to be the hardest of all.
We have time for 2 more questions here.
Hi, I'm Warren Goda. Suppose both of your companies are successful, and we're looking at a future where EVs and hydrogen-powered or augmented vehicles are prevalent. What are some of the things that you would see outside of the automobile industry that are consequences benefits of such a future?
So certainly with battery technology and also with fuel cell technology, there are obviously other applications beyond transportation. One of the areas that we're seeing fuel cells being put in have to do with like data centers and areas that require big amounts of electricity. So for example, Google and Apple, they all have data centers that run off fuel cells, and these fuel cells are running off biogas. So that's one area. There's also stationary power. So the grid, especially in California, is going much more renewable. But of course, you're getting that renewable electricity not necessarily at the times when you're using that electricity. And so it has to be stored in some way. One technique is to store it with batteries, but at the same time, there are also solar capacity where that electricity is converted to hydrogen through electrolysis, and then when it's needed, it's then converted back to electricity through fuel cells. So that's another application. Stationary sources or stationary power sources are going to be big also for both battery and fuel cell.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, we're actually starting a whole separate business unit to commercialize our battery technology and battery architectures for grid applications. You know, it's a pretty sizable business, and you know, planning to do something around 100 million in revenue this year and $500 million next year, just on that secondary, you know, market, you know, outside of cars. So the technology there can have wide and really quite, you know, beneficial impacts for the whole utility grid.
Last question, sir?
Yeah, JB, congratulations on making a spectacular car. It's fun to drive.
Thanks.
Do you foresee any kind of a retrofit in the Model S that would dramatically increase the range capacity going forward? And I get 100%, 280, and at 85%, which is what you're supposed to drive it to, I guess, 240. Do you see anything dramatic happening in a retrofit basis that can use?
Yeah, I know.
Well, you know, we're continuing to work on you know, evolving the battery itself and making something that could potentially be backwards compatible to cars. But I think most people will, you know, choose to keep their battery for a long time because it's a pretty expensive asset. And you know, we've imagined different trade-in schemes and things like that if someone wanted to buy a new battery pack. In fact, we're just doing this with Roadster right now. We're actually, you know, having an upgrade project for Roadsters, you know, where we're increasing the range by a massive amount. You know, when someone buys a new battery pack, it's about 40% more than it was when they bought the car new. You know, it will be a while for Model S, and we don't have anything kind of immediately in our roadmap like that. You know, the technology is newer, and the car was, you know, built with a fairly recent generation. And I think if you look to Roadster in that time frame, that might be sort of the right, you know, sequence, maybe something like 3-4 years at a minimum. And we'd want to wait until batteries start aging. And there's more of a demand for people that are coming in, you know, and actually wanting to replace their battery. Right now, there's almost no demand for that.
So I had a question about flying cars, but we'll leave it here and wait for that, for the Flintstones. Thanks.